Okay, get this. Today's deep dive involves some serious parking lot drama. We're talking luxury condos, legal showdowns, the works.
Sounds intriguing. What kind of parking lot drama are we talking about exactly?
Well, we've got this letter from some residents at Crystal Towers in White Plains, New York. They're in a bit of a standoff with their parking management company.
Okay, and what makes this particular standoff so special? Don't get me wrong, I deal with parking disputes all the time, but there's got to be something more to it, right?
You bet there is. These residents, they're not just any residents, they're shareholders, meaning they essentially own the building, which means they kind of own the parking lot too.
Oh, now that's interesting. So they're essentially their own landlords. That definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity. What are they so fired up about?
Well, for starters, this parking agreement, they're all expected to sign. Yeah, they're not too thrilled with it. They're throwing around legal terms like New York general obligations law and citing court cases.
Sounds like they came prepared.
Huh.
So what's got them so riled up? What's in this parking agreement?
Well, one of their big concerns is this thing called non-Bailey status. They're worried about what happens if their car, you know, gets damaged or even stolen from the lot.
Wait, so even though it's technically their own property, they're not automatically covered if something happens to their cars?
That's what they're afraid of. They're saying this non-daily clause basically lets the management, which remember they technically also control, off the hook if something goes wrong.
Ah, I see where they're coming from. They're worried about liability. And you know what? They might have a point. To make matters even more interesting, they're backing up their concerns with this case, Elish v. Airport Parking Co. of America. Have you heard of it?
I haven't, but it sounds like they're building a legal fortress over there. But let's be real for a second. What does all this legal jargon actually mean for them? In a practical sense, like if someone, say, backs into their car in the lot, do they just have to suck it up?
That seems to be their fear, and honestly, it highlights the core issue here. Just because you can write something into an agreement doesn't mean it'll actually hold up in court, especially when you're talking about this whole unusual ownership structure. It really makes you think, how much protection do you actually give up when you're essentially your own landlord?
That's a question I'd never even considered. But it's a good one. So they're worried about their cars, but what about their actual parking spots? They seem pretty fired up about the possibility of being moved around without warning. They even tossed out the term constructively evicted. Sounds kind of intense for a parking spot, don't you think?
Constructively evicted! Wow, they aren't messing around. So they're worried that the management company might just come in one day and be like, all right, everybody switch spots.
That's what it sounds like. And they're leaning on New York law to argue that such a move would be a major problem, even if it's just a parking spot.
So they're saying even if you own a piece of the building, they can't just treat your assigned parking space like a game of musical chairs and rearrange everyone on a whim.
Exactly. And they're not just, throwing around fancy legal terms. They're citing actual sections of New York real property law to back it up.
Wow. They really did their homework. It's like they're saying, hey, we might be the owners here, but that doesn't mean you can just walk all over us.
It's like they're playing a game of legal chess. This
Yeah.
is getting good. What other legal chess pieces are they moving around?
Well, one thing that caught my eye was their concern about this three strikes rule outlined in the agreement. Basically, if you break the parking rules 3 times,
You're out of there. Sounds more like a baseball game than a parking lot.
right. But they're pointing out that this seemingly simple rule might actually violate New York real property actions and proceedings law, specifically Section 711.
Hold on. Are they seriously suggesting that getting 3 parking tickets could land them in legal hot water?
It seems extreme, I know. But they're suggesting that this super strict penalty system could be grounds for legal action.
Wow. They are not messing around. So they're questioning the legality of the penalty system, anything else. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Oh, there's more. Remember that $250 booting fee we talked about earlier?
$250? Are they serious? That's like a parking ticket on steroids.
That's what they're saying. And get this, they even dug up a specific law in Westchester County that suggests the maximum allowable fee for booting in a private lot should be way lower. It's a classic example of them using their knowledge of local regulations to their advantage.
Talk about legal detectives. They really are uncovering all these little details that most people would probably just gloss over. But what's the strategy here? What are they hoping to achieve with all of this?
I think they're aiming for leverage. By showing just how well they know the legal side of things, they're sending a pretty clear message. We're not afraid to fight for what we believe is right. They're prepared to put up a fight.
So it's a power play, but with legal briefs instead of, fists or whatever.
Yeah.
Pretty clever. But it's not just about the money, is it? They also keep mentioning PR. What's the connection there?
You're right. It goes beyond just dollars and cents. Remember, we're talking about a luxury condo building here. Image is everything. They're worried that these disputes, especially if they escalate, could really hurt the reputation of their community.
So it's about more than just parking tickets and late fees. It's about protecting their investment, maintaining the prestige of Crystal Towers.
Exactly. And they're not afraid to get specific. They even reference New York General Business Law Section 349, which basically says you can't have deceptive business practices. It's like they're saying, look, even if we're making these rules for ourselves, we still need to be fair. It's a matter of principle as much as anything.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're not just parking our cars here. We're parking our reputations, our investments, our pride.
And they're pulling out all the stops to make sure those things are protected. One thing I found really interesting was their mention of the warranty of habitability. Now, this usually applies to the living spaces, ensuring they're, safe and livable, but they're trying to draw a parallel here.
Wait, they're trying to apply the warranty of habitability to a parking lot? How does that even work?
It's a bold move, right? They're essentially saying the parking facilities should be held to a similar standard. Like if there are potholes, bad lighting, things like that, they're arguing that reflects poorly on the building and could impact their enjoyment of their own property.
So they're basically saying if we're paying top dollar to live here, we expect top-notch parking too.
Exactly. And they're not just pulling these arguments out of thin air. They're citing legal statutes, drawing parallels to established legal concepts. It shows a real understanding of how to navigate this complex legal terrain.
They've clearly thought of everything. But with all these potential legal landmines, do they actually have any solutions in mind? Or are they just going into this meeting with a list of complaints and a law dictionary?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They've laid out their concerns, but the next step is figuring out what they actually propose as an alternative. Remember, they're not just residents, they're shareholders. They have a vested interest in finding a solution that works for everyone.
So it's not just about winning a legal battle, it's about finding a way to, govern themselves effectively and fairly. This is fascinating. What else did they mention that could give us clues about their game plan?
Well, there's one more detail that I think is crucial. They keep bringing up communication, transparency. That's a big deal for them.
Oh, interesting. So it's not all just legal battles and, waving around law books. They actually want to, sit down and talk it out.
That's the vibe I'm getting. And honestly, that might be the smartest move in this whole crazy situation. Remember, they're not dealing with some, outside landlords. They are the landlords. It's in everyone's best interest to find a solution that works.
Right. It's like they're realizing that, winning in court isn't the same as actually having a peaceful place to live. They're seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating to me. It's like a perfect example of, those challenges we face in any community. How do we balance what everyone needs? How do we make rules that actually work? That kind of thing.
It's amazing how something as normal as a parking agreement can turn into this whole big thing.
Right. It just goes to show, the power of actually paying attention. These residents, they didn't just shrug and accept it. They dug in, asked questions. That's huge.
They turned a parking dispute into a masterclass in legal strategy and being a good neighbor.
Exactly. And that's something we can all learn from, no matter what we're dealing with,
Well said. This has been quite a ride. So as these Crystal Towers residents gear up for their big meeting, what's the key takeaway? What's the one thing our listeners should remember from all of this parking lot drama?
Knowledge is power, my friend. No matter what you're signing, a lease, a contract, even just parking your car, understand what you're getting into, ask questions, do your research. It's worth it.
And hey, sometimes the best solution isn't about winning or losing, right? Sometimes it's about talking it out, finding some common ground.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive. We've uncovered some serious legal loopholes, explored the wild world of shared ownership. We've been busy.
It's been a pleasure joining you for this. Always fascinating to see how these things play out.
And for our listeners, if you're itching to dive even deeper into the fascinating world of New York real property law, we've got you covered. You can find links to all the legal stuff we talked about in the show notes. Happy reading. This is The Deep Dive, signing off.
They keep mentioning PR, public relations. It seems like they're thinking about the bigger picture here.
PR. So it's not just about avoiding a parking ticket. They're worried about bad press for the whole building.
Right. We're talking luxury condos here. Image is everything. They're worried all this parking drama, especially if it ends up in court, could make the whole building look bad.
That makes sense. I mean, who wants to buy a condo with the side of legal battle? So what are they hoping to do?
Well, they keep saying things like, we need clear communication. Everything needs to be transparent. It seems like they're hoping to find a way to work things out without, lawyers and lawsuits.
So maybe less Judge Judy, more let's all be adults and talk this through.
Exactly. And honestly, that might be the smartest move here. Remember, they're not just dealing with some outside landlords. They are the landlords. They're all in this together.
It's like they're realizing that even if they win in court, everyone still has to live with each other. It's about finding a solution that works for everybody.
Right, because at the end of the day, winning a legal argument isn't the same as having a peaceful place to live.
This has been fascinating. As these Crystal Towers residents gear up for their big showdown, what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say the biggest thing is knowledge is power. Whether you're renting an apartment, buying a house, or, yes, even just parking your car, take the time to understand what you're agreeing to.
Ask questions, read the fine print, and don't be afraid to speak up if something doesn't seem right.
Couldn't agree more.
Sometimes the best solution isn't about winning or losing, but finding that common ground.
Absolutely.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the wild world of parking lot legalese.
It's been a pleasure joining you today. Always fascinating to see how these things play out.
And for our listeners, if you want to dive even deeper into the fascinating world of New York real property law, you can find links to all the legal stuff we talked about today in our show notes. This is This Dive, signing off.